Fox 6.
Massachusetts lawmakers voting in sweeping gun reform legislation with overwhelming support earlier this evening. Welcome everyone to Western Mass News at 10. I'm Chris Pisano. Western Mass News reporter Maria Wilson now joins us live in studio with the latest from Beacon Hill. Maria.
Chris, the Massachusetts House of Representatives voted earlier tonight in support of sweeping gun reform legislation that would overhaul the current laws here in the Bay State.
120 votes in the affirmative, 38 votes in the negative. The bill is passed.
The Massachusetts House of Representatives passing a 125-page bill that aims to curb the rise of unregistered or ghost guns, requires gun owners to complete live training, and outlaws carrying firearms in schools, government buildings, or while intoxicated. With the state seeing 90 separate shootings since July 1st, supporters say stronger gun laws are the answer when it comes to gun violence.
This legislation is personal. It's personal to thousands of mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and Democrats and Republicans, families and friends. Gun violence has touched us all.
I believe this bill will save lives. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. Now is the time to act.
This bill would allow me to help my dad. My dad helped me with everything, and this bill would allow me to call and say, he's struggling right now, and I need his gun, his weapon to be withheld from him until he's in a better place.
But the bill faced heavy scrutiny from others.
The sad reality is if someone's mind is committed to do harm, it doesn't matter the tool or mechanism that they use or the laws that are on the books.
Making our state safer does not necessarily mean passing more laws. Based on my experience, I can tell you that I do not believe Massachusetts has a problem with law-abiding gun owners killing people. We have a problem with the enforcement of our existing laws,
including from some gun owners and law enforcement agencies, like Ware Police Chief Sean Craver.
This new bill will do nothing whatsoever to protect the public. It does not address the criminal element or the sentencing guidelines that need to be enforced for our current gun laws in Massachusetts.
Craver goes on to tell me that he feels that this legislation unfairly targets lawful gun owners, but we are still several steps away from seeing this bill enacted into law. It would first need to be passed by the Senate before appearing on Governor Maura Healey's desk. And at this point, the Massachusetts Senate still does not have a set time frame on when they'll take this up. Reporting live in studio, I'm Maria Wilson, Western Mass News.